What's up, everybody? My name is Daniel Unmanageable, and this is Hard Knocks Talks. Today's guest, Alex Colyer, was admittedly closed-minded to the realities of addiction. However, after losing a close friend to overdose, her eyes were opened, and since then, she has been advocating for better substance use services and education with her organization, the Albertus Project, and we are going to meet her right after this. I spent 23 years living in addiction. 16 of those years, I worked as a Red Seal tradesperson in Saskatchewan and Northern Alberta. During that time, I made many mistakes and took more than a few hard knocks. I went from tradesman to business owner to hiding from gang members and dumpster diving. But with that lived experience, I've decided to try and make a change. I've dedicated my life to raising awareness and promoting change in the fields of substance use and psychological health and safety. So join me and my guests as we take off the blinders around mental health in our communities and at work and shine a light on what's working and what's not working in the fields of mental health and occupational health and safety. I'm Daniel Unmanageable, and I'll be your host, and this is Hard Knocks Talks. Okay, before we bring in Alex, I'd just like to mention that today's episode is brought to you in part by Prairie Sky Recovery Center in Leipzig, Saskatchewan. Today's episode is also brought to you in part by Stronger Together Canada, peer-led support groups by Moms Stop the Harm. To learn more about our sponsors, stay up to date on all our upcoming streams, get on our email list, and more, visit www.hardknockstalks.com. Let's bring in Alex. Hey, Alex.
Hey, how's it going? I love that intro. It's awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I love it too. You know, I practiced saying Alex's last name before the show, and I still managed to stumble through it.
I was gonna say I'm recently married. That's my new last name, so I stumble on it too, honestly.
Oh, well, that somehow brings me comfort. So, is there anything that you'd like to say before we jump in today?
No, I'm just really grateful to be here, excited to be able to reach more people, even if it's just one person listening and we can help them anyway. I'm just very excited to be here. So thank you for the opportunity.
Awesome. Okay. Well, speaking of being here today, why don't you tell us why you're here today? What do you do?
Yeah, sure. So I started my nonprofit, the Albertus Project, about a year and some change. And honestly, before then, I knew absolutely nothing about addiction. If you told me a couple of years ago I'd be running a nonprofit to support the addiction community, I would have laughed in your face and told you there's no way. And it really wasn't until I lost one of my best friends, Reed, to an overdose that I realized how little I knew and how much I could have helped my friend. And I just didn't know how to. It wasn't out of it was really just out of pure ignorance. And I realized, wow, if I'm not educated on this topic and I had a best friend who passed away from this, I don't want any best friend to have to go through this again, deal what I did. But at the same time, I wanted to make sure that I was trying to reach people like me who held a lot of different stigmatized views. Originally, I thought, addiction was a choice. I thought that if you had enough willpower, you could overcome it. And that's just things that you're sort of taught when you're little. You're taught, doing drugs is bad, and the people that do drugs are also bad people. So that's just something you sort of grow up with. And after I realized, obviously, I love my best friend to death. She was an incredibly strong person, personal, kind, generous, and brilliant. I realized I needed to be a part of this conversation. So the Albertus Project was founded in honor of my friend, and really we tackle a bunch of things. So our mission is READ. R is to redefine the way that the world views addiction from one of blame and shame to one of compassion and support. E, to empower those who are suffering as well as the family and friends. The other E is to educate, which is huge for us. And lastly, destigmatize, because I think the more education, the better, the more that people can understand the actual truths versus the myths about addiction. We have a much more welcoming space. And I liked how in your video you touched on it's not only a safe space, but it's a brave space. And people who are dealing with addiction and their family and friends are brave people. And at the end of the day, they need to be humanized just like every one of us who are dealing with our own issues.
Mm-hmm. So going back for a minute, you said that these were values that were taught to you growing up. Did you grow up in a community where substance use was prevalent?
No, not at all. I grew up in, I now live in Washington, D.C., but I grew up in Toronto, Canada. I always thought that not doing drugs was like the greatest thing ever. And I'm technically better than other people. And, I'm educated, and I was lucky enough to come from a very well off family and felt like I didn't need to do any of that.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I was sort of afraid of it, right? Because you're taught from a young age, you're going to get addicted really fast. Now I know, obviously, that's actually not the case at all. The vast majority of people who do use substances, about 80-90%, don't become addicted. But it's just something you're taught even at a young age in school. I think about how in schools we're now taught not abstinence is the key when it comes to sex, but safe sex, use a condom, STDs, right? Sort of like a form of harm reduction. And that was never taught to me in school. And I want to change that, but it's just the way that we go about our daily lives, the things that are immediate. Really, all that I knew about addiction is what I saw in movies. And obviously now I realize how crazy that is, but that's what a lot of people know about addiction, is not through lived experience, not through education, not through data, but from what they see in the media.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll briefly touch on that, is why this is happening right now. We talked a little bit about that before the show. How the mainstream media doesn't really depict it accurately. And I have
Correct.
personal experience with being depicted in a way that I was not intended. I didn't intend to be depicted that way. So
Exactly.
yeah. So you mentioned something that was interesting to me. You said that you prided yourself because you didn't do drugs. Now, was that something that was prevalent in your mind, in sort of the forefront, I don't do drugs? Why was that something that you would think of often? That's
Yeah,
interesting.
well, it's just funny. First of all, I always knew I wanted to work in the national security space. So I knew right off the bat from being a teenager that in order to work in the national security space, that was never allowed. And I'm like, holy smokes, you have really smart people working in national security space. So I want to emulate paths like them. And I was told that even smoking weed disqualifies you from that career path. So I'm like, I sort of associate as, a young kid, teenager, that in order for me to achieve my dreams and do what I want to do, clearly I can't go down this path. And I thought this is, again, a huge stigmatized notion that, people who do drugs, had nothing going on in their lives. They were just, maybe they were lazy or they didn't have aspirations. Now I know, holy smokes, that is, it took someone like Reed for me to wake up, losing Reed, realizing she was ambitious. She was brilliant. I went to school with her. She was working at BMO before she died. She had all the things that you would never associate with someone who uses drugs, because you have this notion. And I'm like, wait, Reed was none of those things. I knew Reed tried. Reed went to rehab. Reed relied on friends and family. Reed did technically everything right, and it still wasn't enough. So I'm like, wow, it can't just be one case scenario where I lost my friend and this just happened. She just happens to be an outlier. And when I started doing the research and the data, because that's what I cared about after she passed, I felt lost. I felt alone. I didn't know where to go. And we'll talk about it later, but I felt like there was no resources for me. I started seeing that none of what I thought was true was actually true. And in fact, it was the exact opposite. So it was partly because I had a dream that I wanted to pursue for a career, and I was told you can't do that. And part of which was just thinking, oh, these people have nothing to do with their time. They don't have anything to look forward to. They're lazy people. Obviously all incorrect, but that's originally what I thought. So that's why I thought, oh, I'm better. I'm in school. I do really well, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Did you know about Reed's substance use before
she passed?
Yeah, you know what? I did. And I kicked myself so many times. And, this is why I'm doing this. I did, but I didn't, know to the extent because I was sort of like, oh, she doesn't want to talk about it, or, oh, I shouldn't ask. I felt like I love her, but she'll come to me if she needs something. That's stupid because I'm a person who suffers from anxiety. So I can
Hmm.
understand on the mental health side of the house. You need people who are not bothering you and not badgering you, but being like, I am here. What do
Yeah.
you need? And I was so out of my depths, and I kicked myself because I really didn't know what to do. And then the only times that, we sort of ever talked about, she's like, oh, I'm going to rehab. And I thought, oh, she's going to rehab. Like, it's cured, right? Like,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have
As soon as
cancer,
she,
you do chemo.
yeah, yeah, you walk out the
It
treatment
just
center doors and life is
Right, and
great.
everything's A-okay.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, like, she's going to rehab. And then I started thinking, then she went more than once. I'm like, oh, maybe that, she went to her new rehab place. Clearly that other place was bad, right? Then she
Hmm.
went to another, I started putting together, I'm like, what's going on with these different rehab centers that they're not able to cure my best friend?
I want to talk about that. I find that really
Yeah.
interesting, that you mentioned it like that, because I often think that too, like these treatment centers, probably wonderful programs. Like I'm not going to talk bad about any of the treatment centers, but the way that our system is set up, you get the treatment and then that's it. Right. And
Exactly.
then
And
when it
that's
doesn't
just
work, and then when it doesn't work, the masses are like, well, there's no cure for there's no
right.
helping these
And
people.
that's just Exactly, and that's just not real life. And
Yeah.
one of the things that the Albertus Project has done, and it's been a huge passion of mine, was I was like, the prevalence of people who go to rehab and die from an overdose within 2 weeks is enormously high. I'm like, there's something wrong here. We need to figure out what the issue is. And clearly, while, as you said, some rehab centers and work for some people, they certainly don't work for all. And there needs to be a continuum of care.
Hmm.
And I'm sure we'll go into later, but one of the things that, and I know you talked about it a little bit earlier, is medication assisted treatment, Suboxone. Who
Yeah.
knew that there is medicine that has been proven to be incredibly effective in, number one, the most important thing, decreasing a risk of a fatal overdose, but
Hmm.
it decreases illicit opioid use, it decreases the prevalence of transmission of bloodborne illnesses. Like it does so much. So you've got your medicine bucket, you got the rehab bucket. You also have a lot of people, surprisingly, can manage their addiction without any of that. Some people use recovery groups, and again, there's 12 step, there's many different others. And what works for, I think the most important thing, if anyone's going to take away anything today, is there's an idea that you have an addiction, you're stuck with it for the rest of your life, you must go to rehab, you must be totally abstinent, and you get out and you go to a 12 step program.
Hmm.
That's the traditional model. While it works for some, and I'm so happy it doesn't work for actually the majority of people, says the data. So
Yeah.
the most important thing is what works for one person isn't going to work for another. And that's totally fine. There is a continuum of care.
Yeah.
And we, as the friends and family, and frankly, the public and society, need to recognize that there's no right way of doing things. And
Hmm.
whatever works for that individual, that person needs to feel empowered. It's been proven that if someone chooses their own treatment, they're much more likely to continue it and stay in it. So if
Hmm.
that person feels empowered, I wish I had all the knowledge that I had now to share with Reed. Hey, Reed, you don't want to go to rehab? Fine.
Yeah.
There's so many different options. And if you want to do a bunch, if you want to try one, if you want to try none, we'll do whatever you want. But that's a key thing that I think we need to be shoving out to the public.
Got some comments coming in here from Kelsey Dumont, our resident pharmacist. Thank you, Kelsey, for being here today. Kelsey says, every person who is involved in developing and implementing policies and governance needs to hear you speak.
Thank you. I hope so. Like it's one of those things, and this is sort of what I think about all the time. If you come from my perspective, and I'm for the war on drugs, for complete abstinence, for locking up people for smoking weed, like the dumbest stuff. Now you look and you're like, this girl's like crazy, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I can change my view just from actually learning the data, just based on nothing else, not emotional response, just looking at the data, I know that other people are capable of doing it
Do
too.
you
And
think
that's when I was sorry, go ahead.
Do you think that that's what it was? Because I mean, the emotional response triggered the desire to learn.
100%. But what I mean is, it wasn't Reed's death that actually changed my opinion on addiction. It was the actual data. Like,
Right.
Reed could have died. I looked at the data and I would have saw what I thought. So I thought I was going to see what I originally thought, that like it just happened to be a fluke. She was an outlier. She was a smart person. She did have ambition, but
Yeah.
the rest of them are lazy and the rest of them are a choice.
Yeah.
When you actually look at the data, you realize, holy, that's absolutely not the case. So I know that if I can do it, other people can. And that's really why I started the Albertus Project, because I knew I learned after she passed, she was helping people while she was suffering. She was able to get people to start the recovery journey. And I'm like, she couldn't do it herself, even though she tried so hard, but she was successfully able to save the lives of many others. So I wanted to continue on that work. And then I was looking at the landscape of nonprofits, and they're amazing nonprofits. You mentioned Mom Stop the Harm. I love them. I think they're fantastic. But I saw sort of a gap in that no one was targeting people who don't get it. No one was targeting the people like me who I don't want to, not that I don't want to, I don't really care to speak to the people who get it. You're on my team. We're all on the same message. I want to speak to the people who don't.
You are like taking words out of my mouth, and it's interesting because I saw this morning I was cruising Twitter and I saw your post. You were talking about how does your higher power, or how important is your higher power in recovery? Yeah. I saw that and I'm like, I know that this person also advocates for harm reduction, and it is so challenging to find organizations that do both, like it's
yeah, and you can do it all. And that's the thing. It's like, for some people, I know some people that say that for them, abstinence is a must. They would not be here if it wasn't for their abstinence.
That's me.
But
100%.
which is great. And exactly, that is 1,000% correct. And that is 100% for you, and you know you best. However, I think it would be wrong for you or anyone of that matter if someone was not going to do an abstinence route and do a harm reduction, be like, oh, well, you're just going to die.
You're going to die.
I see that all the time.
You might as well just go out and die. Yeah, I heard that a lot. And in the beginning, when I first got to the rooms, I was that guy. I did that.
Yeah.
And every time it gets brought up, I say, if anybody out there is listening right now and I said that to you, I sincerely apologize. So.
Yeah, and listen, it's okay. Like, and that's the thing. Like, the most important thing is like we learn, and I continue to learn every single day. But I love, like, I know a counselor who practices abstinence for himself, and won't do anything because he knows that he won't be able to sort of stop himself, and that's his belief. But he's a substance use counselor and encourages the use of harm reduction for those patients who say they want to try it. That's all you need. You just, like no doctor, right? Every doctor is going to tell you based on data and facts, but maybe some will, but they're not supposed to judge you based on what you choose. That's your individual path and journey. And I just think the issue with this space that I've seen since I've been in it is we have stigma from outside the community where I come from, but then there's just as much stigma inside because you have people who have gone a specific path and said,
and this is the only way.
If you don't do my way, this is it's like, isn't the whole point supposed to be saving lives? Who gives a shit? Hopefully I'm allowed to say that. If we're saving lives by one way or another, we're supposed to just be saving lives. So it shouldn't matter. And I just think there's no wonder why no one else on the outside gets it. They don't get it because there's 10 million messages on the inside that are not making it out because everyone's infighting. And I think that's something that needs to be fixed.
We've got a comment here just from Kelsey saying, after the show, I'd love you post their Twitter handle so I can follow. Alex, what's your Twitter handle while we're talking about that?
It is Project Albertus. Someone in Denmark took Albertus Project. So I had to do it backwards. Project Albertus. And Albertus is Albertus. And that is named after, so the Albertus Project is named after Reed Street that she grew up on in Toronto. We spent a lot of time, Albertus Avenue in Toronto. And the reason why I named it something like that is A, wanted to honor her, but B, I know how much stigma like different nonprofits carry by having like addiction or mental health in
Yeah.
their name. So
Yeah.
to me, I wanted people to be able to start the conversation. People be like, "Oh, what is this?" and not
Yes.
judge it right away. Because they're always, "Oh, you run but what's the Albertus Project?" And then I can go into it and then have a conversation.
Mhm.
Versus, I feel like some people might have written it off simply by it having addiction or something like that in the name.
So it's I had the same idea when I named my project. It's a wonderful opportunity to have just a minute to build rapport, right? Before you
Exactly.
it's like it's not a cold call anymore.
Let me bring you in, and
Yeah.
then we'll have a conversation. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about the services that you offer. Some of them are quite remarkable, and they're available all over North America. Like it's can we start
Yeah.
with so let's start. You have a deal with Walmart, correct?
Yeah,
And you can
exactly.
provide like a whole bunch of stuff to people in need. Like tell us about that.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, I we are a very small nonprofit, but I try to be as frugal and resourceful with money as possible. And I found that Walmart gives a grant if you apply and you get accepted to different nonprofits in the United States and Canada. And then that allows them to provide funding for a specific mission set. So I asked for funding in order to be able to help the addiction community. So for those who are recently incarcerated or just came home from rehab or at home and their recovery journey is really tough and they just got laid off or whatever it is, to be able to pay for if they need, food. We've been getting people like mattresses, help pay for their medication, like what hygiene supplies. A lot of people are like, I don't have like, I'm pregnant, I'm starting my recovery journey, I just found out. I don't have money to get like bottles and stuff for my baby and diapers. So that's a very common thing that we provide. So I think this isn't lived experience, but from everything that I see, recovery is so goddamn difficult. And the last thing that someone should have to worry about is like making the rest of the life work. So the
Mhm.
Albertus Project, and you can apply if you're in Canada or the US. We have a form on our website, and it's in the link in all of our bios. But the ability for people to ask for what they need, and 9 times out of 10, we're able to provide it. And it's awesome because we've been able to help people. I mean, I've never been to Kentucky. We've helped people in Kentucky. We've helped people in West Virginia, like all over Toronto, Vancouver. I mean, wherever you name it. And it's great because the good and bad thing about the pandemic is obviously the pandemic made the crisis when it comes to overdoses much worse.
Mhm.
It also allowed me though to realize like, hey, I'm from Toronto. I live in Washington, D.C. I want to help as many people as possible. I don't care about borders. I don't care about the state that I'm in. So this grant allows us to reach as many people as possible, and everyone has a Walmart near them at some place, state, province, wherever you're at. So it's a really easy way to help the community.
So it's like a voucher then. So what
Basically, yep.
how is the application process pretty low barrier or
It is pretty low barrier, and that's what I was telling. I've been having some nonprofits reach out to me and ask for the funding, but because the funding is so limited, I really try to keep it to individuals. But I
Mhm.
send them all the information, like this is how I applied, like this is sort of what I suggest how to go about doing it. It is pretty low barrier. I've applied to some other stuff that is like a heck of a lot of work. I don't think this is, and I really recommend for any nonprofit who qualifies. I think you have to have specific designations, so that I recommend people looking into. But I
Mhm.
highly recommend you reaching out to local businesses. That's what I've done: Target, CVS, Walgreens. I've got gift cards. They're not high denominations, but anything helps,
Yeah,
right? If
of course.
if someone reaches out to me and needs something, I'm able to provide what they need, and that's because so I recommend for nonprofits in this space, reach out to local businesses or national businesses, see what they're able to provide you, and
Mhm.
honestly, more often than not, they'll be able to help your mission.
Mhm. Now, and what I was referring more specifically to the people that would apply to you for this care. Um, what are the steps? Like, is there a lot of paperwork? Because I know, like, when I was fresh in
Whoa,
recovery,
whoa,
when I
whoa.
had
For
like,
the people who apply, no, the paperwork is literally, I asked them to fill out, I think it's like a 5-question form
uh
with how this would help them. Like, they have to certify that they're in recovery, how this would help them, and what they need, and
how
the
do they
shipping address.
certify that, and what defines
So,
recovery?
well, that's people ask me that all the time. Like, Alex,
Yeah.
how do you know if someone's lying to you? I don't.
Yeah.
I go honestly mostly on people's word. Basically at the end of the day, like it sort of goes, it reminds me of like the other day, my husband and I were driving to go get groceries in Virginia where we live. And there was a homeless gentleman who said he needed money for food. My husband and I got into a little bit of an argument. He's just like, well, what if he uses it for booze and drugs? I said, so he uses it for booze and drugs. Like at the end of
Yeah.
the day,
Then he's not bringing
I
harm to
have
the
to
community to
believe,
get his
right.
money.
I have
Yeah.
to believe people to a certain extent. Like
Mhm.
some people have asked for like so much and I'll say, hey, can you pick and choose? I only have so much money. But really, I don't want to say anyone who applies gets it, but almost anyone who applies gets it because I have to have belief. There's so many people who think that these people are liars and whatever. Like I have to have belief in the system and have some sort of optimism that people who are applying, who when they need diapers, like if someone's going to try to rip me off, I don't think they're going to ask for diapers. You know, it's
Mhm.
pretty clear with what people ask. Like no one's asked for like a TV. You know, people are asking for basic necessities: underwear, socks, medicine, food for their kids, and that makes me sad because I'm like, wow, like I'm really fortunate, but it also makes me really happy because I know like this is going to the exact people who need it.
Yeah. That, you know, it's something that just dropped into my head. Oftentimes people are like, I don't give people that, you know, ask me for change. I don't give it to them because what if they spend it on drugs? What are your thoughts on that? Like for me, like I used to be like, no, just go and buy them food or go and buy, you know, something like that instead. And that's,
Yeah.
you know, valiant enough. But
Yeah, no, that's a good question. You asked me this, I think even like 6 months ago, I would have not even. So a year ago, before the Albertus Project, I would not have even stopped. I would have rolled up my window at the homeless person and frankly not really cared. 6 months ago, I would have said, oh, let me go get them food because I don't want them to spend it on things I don't want them to. And now my opinion is, these people are going to need to be able to, these people are already judged so hard. If I'm going to give them $5, first of all, they're not going to be able to buy very good drugs for $5. I'll tell you that. Number one. Number two, let them buy what they want to buy. Like at the end of the day, my job as a fellow human being is to be there for someone who's going through a rough time. It's the same thing. I have to have belief in the system. I have to have belief in people. I think people are a lot more pessimistic than me. Maybe when I get like ripped off by someone, I'll have a different opinion, but I run a nonprofit. I know how hard it is to get donations. And I'll tell you, the other thing too is there are millions of people around the world suffering. I mean, there's probably millions of people just in the US and Canada alone with substance use disorder. And I'm having trouble finding more people to help. I have more money to give. I have more funding to provide for Ubers, for treatment centers. I have more, whatever it is. And I've run out of people who have found out about the Albertus Project to get things. So you're
in my link tree now. You're in my link tree now.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's not as easy. I speak to treatment centers all the time. And I say, hey, this is what we're doing. And they're like, oh my God, that's so amazing. I said, do me a favor. When a patient comes in or put this on a bulletin board, something, oh yeah, we'll for sure do that. None of the big treatment centers that I've asked to do that it will greatly benefit their patients. And there's no ask for the treatment centers, no nothing, have done it. And that comes down to just not caring about your patients. And that's what it is at the end of the day. That's the thing that frustrates me the most, because there's a lot of people who need help. Organizations like mine and many others who are willing to do it. It's just the barriers of people finding it or whatever that may be.
Your link that I have in my link tree has, last I checked, and that was last night, it's had 4 clicks since I put it up there.
Awesome. Okay, 4 more people. I'll take it. I'll take it. One extra person, and that's all you need sometimes. It's starting at a grassroots level and trying to, I'm helping to educate even like my friends who are, I don't want to say they're definitely not as hardcore as I was, but they don't necessarily get it as much. And one mind change is another person who has less stigma, who is another person who's more likely to help someone. So,
got a question coming in here. Not sure if you can answer it, but we're going to whip it out here anyways. Lizzie, thank you for the question. Lizzie asks, where can I find actual statistics on the number of fatalities that happen shortly following rehab. I have always suspected that due to anecdotal lived experience.
Yeah, excellent question. I will find that I've actually kept a rolling document of statistics like that I've followed because I think it's so important to share. And I have the link somewhere in there. So I will get that to Dan. And Dan, if you don't mind sharing that out, that would be helpful. Just so I think, and also you can follow us at Albertus Project everywhere, and I'll eventually post it. But it really is crazy. I don't think it's not like 80% or 70%, but it's like a high statistic. And even 1%, the whole point is when people go to rehab, I hate to say it, but it's sort of like jail, right? You don't have your phone, you don't have access to your family, like you're punished for being human and going through something. I know, I think the whole model is kind of crazy, but you're really like, and then people come out, they're like, I'm 25 days sober, 28 days sober. Yeah, because you haven't had access to anything. And I think kudos to you, that's 28 days because that's so tough.
Yeah.
But what skills do you have in order to actually be in the real world and be able to combat that? That is, I cannot imagine the strength of people who have to do that. That's why, and I have another statistic too, not off the hand of what it is, but incarcerated individuals who get out are 3.5 as likely to die within 1 month of leaving incarceration from an opioid overdose than other individuals. And same thing, that's because they have no tolerance. They don't have the skills to be able to like maintain different things for themselves. And again, that's exactly
or the support in finding a new way to live.
Right. There's no bridge. Bridge. And why would these people not like, I don't blame these people at all. I think they have so much strength to be able to try to fight. And it's just a difficult situation.
Kelsey's coming in hot with the facts here. Let's check this out. Kelsey says it's 7 to 9 times higher likelihood of a fatal overdose following rehab and or incarceration versus someone who were on the streets using. Kelsey is our resident.
If you can drop a link, I would love you to drop a link so we can take a look at that. Yeah, I mean, the data is out there. It's 100% real. And I think it's just important for people to know. So like my whole thing of like locking people up, makes no sense just from a standpoint of like, why are we going to punish someone for something that they can't help? 2, you're paying money. So for like conservative people who are like, I don't want to pay for it. Well, you're paying for money for these people. 3, the healthcare costs.
You certainly are paying a lot of money.
Overdose and healthcare costs and incarceration costs. So that's 3. And then 4, these people get out and die. It's like, that is not a sustainable way of going about things. We are never going to punish someone for being a diabetic and having type 1 diabetes or type 2 diabetes, eating a cupcake, and we're not going to throw them in jail. Like, you have a health condition, you know it, and you're still continuing to use. Why do we treat that any differently than we do with people who use drugs?
Yeah. And for Christ's sakes, give them $5. You know, we want to talk. Let's put our harm reduction glasses on here for a moment and think about this. If we give the person this $5, they are not bringing harm to the community to get that $5.
Exactly.
So, what's cheaper? You know, if we look at this at a cost saving standpoint, you know, the fact, I'm not giving him that $5 because they'll just go and buy drugs. Well, at least they're not robbing people
exactly,
or doing other things when they're in this drug seeking psychosis.
Any crime to be able to. I hate when people say, you know, feed their habit, because it's not a habit, to be able to supply themselves the drugs that they actually need so they don't go through withdrawal. But that's it. You know, my husband and I had very different stances, and I got mad. I said this whole thing, and like I had this thing, and he's like, fine, understood, you know, and he's been such a huge supporter of mine. But it goes to show that people who get it can still fall back into this mindset. I still have to check myself sometimes.
Yeah, me too.
Because you have preconceived notions. I've held stigmatized views for so long that it takes me, you know, it might take me a sec to like, okay, no, like that isn't true. Maybe you've seen that in a movie. Like this is the actual data. So I think people who even say that they know it all, who don't, need to continually update their facts, hear from other people with opposing views. And I just think it's important.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the other the other things that the Albertus Project has to offer. I know there's a slew of them, educations, and are there other services that you have
Yeah.
access to?
So one of the other things is Canada's a heck of a lot better when it comes to this, thank God. But in the United States, the DA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, has made people who take methadone's lives pretty miserable. And you have to go something to a place called an OTP, an opioid treatment program. And those are typically in like city centers, so they're not in like rural places. So in order to get methadone, you have to go every single day, line up at like 5 a.m. to get the medication that you need. We would never do that for other people with other comorbidities. And a lot of people can't afford to get to their treatment center. So number one, the most important thing is getting people through the door. So when I started the Albertus Project, I reached out to a bunch of treatment centers and people that I know, and they said, Alex, one of the biggest things right now is like we are losing people on a daily basis because they call the treatment center and say, hey, I don't have money to get there. Insurance or Medicare will cover me for the medicine, but I can't get there. Can you pay for it? And the treatment centers say, no, we can't. And that's not their fault. They just don't have money for it. So the Albertus Project in the United States will pay for anyone, but we have a couple specific partnerships with different healthcare companies who run OTPs in Florida, West Virginia, Texas, and Virginia. And we pay for anyone who needs transportation to their treatment center, and also anyone who needs help to pay for their methadone or Suboxone. In the last 6 months, I think we've helped over 150, 200 people, and that's the best thing ever. So that's one of the other major things that we do. Paying for, to me, evidence-based treatment is number one, the most important thing in terms of opioid use reduction and reducing fatalities, as we discussed before, is medicine. So that's huge, and that's something that we provide. Another thing that we provide too is I'm very big on how can we help friends and family of those who are suffering from addiction. I wish I had the skills that I do now. I wish I had the support. I wish I knew what I knew now when Reed was alive. But there are people, all the questions that I get asked bi-weekly, weekly, whatever it is, are from family members and friends on Instagram, Facebook, whatever it is. Hi, Alex, my name is blah, blah, blah. I have a son, I have a daughter, I have a cousin, blah, 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 who's suffering. How the hell do I get them help? Like, what do I do? So the other thing that we do is there's something called CRAFT, which is community reinforcement and family training. Highly, highly, highly recommend everyone take a look at it. We have a bunch of resources on our website, but it's a type of therapy that a family member takes with a CRAFT certified clinician, and it helps you change your behaviors to help influence your loved one to change theirs. So the most important thing, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I'm awesome. Like, fellow podcaster, you recognize the cues. You recognize when I get inquisitive.
Yeah. Well, I've always yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting, and the statistics are incredible. You use CRAFT, and your loved one's like, nothing's wrong with me, and my life's fine, and I'm not going to treatment. If you use CRAFT, you have a 70% chance of getting your loved one into treatment. And even if they don't go to treatment, making your life better because you're looking at addiction a different way. They give you coping skills and mechanisms and how to talk to someone who's dealing with addiction. And I think at the end of the day, the lone sort of survivors are often the parents, whoever lives with someone dealing with substance use. And it's so important that people who are living with these people also take care of themselves. You can't help anyone. You can't, the airlines tell you put your oxygen mask on before someone else's. It's the same thing when it comes to addiction. So we pay for that for people who can't afford it, also via our website. But highly recommend everyone just know that CRAFT exists. There's a resource on our website. Like, what is it? How do you find a CRAFT clinician? Blah, 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 blah. So that's another thing that we provide too.
So tell us just briefly, now you say it teaches you about the behavior and how to respond differently to it. Yeah. Can you give us some examples of how you would respond differently?
Exactly. And I have to tell you, it's like, it sounds so easy and it's really difficult. So like there's an example like I'm a wife, my husband is, dealing with alcoholism. comes home absolutely hammered, let's say, typically someone who's so fed up with this says, Mike, why the hell are you drinking? I'm sick of this. I'm not calling into you for work tomorrow and explaining what happened. You need to get your shit together, so on and so forth, right? Yelling, angry. Understandably, these people are like sick of having to deal with this, sick of telling them, you said you'd stop.
Mm-hmm.
They get home. Mike, I'm so happy you're home safe. I think we should discuss in the morning. Have a great night. Maybe you want to sleep on the couch. It might be more comfortable for you. That's it. Walk away. And that sounds so easy. That's really hard. When you're pissed off, you're living with someone every single day with it's those things. And at the end of the day, and what I love about craft is it empowers the loved ones. At the end of the day, and this is true, no one knows the reasons why they use, the patterns, the behaviors, the things that bring it on, the things that make it a little better than a loved one. Who knows that stuff better? I can guarantee you someone who's living with someone with addiction can say, this is when Mike uses. He often uses after he works out, or he doesn't work out anymore. He usually does this, and then he goes that. They know everything. And craft employs and empowers that loved one to share that information, to use that as motivating resource to get your loved one better, while at the same time working on you, where even if Mike does come home and he keeps being trashed, even though you've done your right thing, you at least A, know that you tried, and B, you're not wasting that energy anymore. You're learning that, hey, there's going to be a separation. I'm going to treat myself better. Like, to me, that's magic. Like, everyone needs to know that craft exists because A, it works. It helps your loved one. Arguably, most importantly, it helps you. And that at the end of the day is what we got to take care of, the family and friends. And then hopefully that other person will get on board too. But it's, again, 70% is really good and much better than anything exists. There's a 30% chance they might not get better. And it is what it is, but you tried.
Yeah. And it's interesting. Like I often get family members emailing and messaging the page and whatever, saying, you know, my husband, my son, my daughters. And the first thing I ask them, I'm like, well, what are you doing for yourself?
Right.
You know,
they often forget.
They often forget. I get it. You know?
Yeah. There's so much going on. And it's like, you know, I've always like, you can't will it more than that person. The best that you can do, and this is sort of what I tell people, is like all the facts that I'm spitting out and things, it's just because I've learned so much and continue to. And what, you know, I say for people, the best thing that they can do is start to get educated. And that doesn't mean you got to spend as many hours as you and I do researching and, we learn a lot, at least I do, and I'm sure you do too, by speaking to people. That's how I get a lot of my information. At the end of the day, not everyone has that time. So I'm going to plug my resources for 1 second, but part of the reason why for the Albertus Project, I found it so difficult to grieve and cope and whatever is because I couldn't find the truth online. Like, I couldn't find if it was genetic. I couldn't find, like, could I actually have done something? Like, what could our family and friends do? Like, there was just so much in my head that I just didn't have the answers to. When I went online, one website would say something, another website would say another thing. And then scholarly articles would get to the facts, but like, it was a lot to process in my mind.
Yeah,
it was just too much.
I can't.
Too much.
Like, I look at academic, peer reviewed articles and stuff, and like that's part of the reason I dropped out of university, to be quite honest. You know,
it's a lot. One also, the thing is, I wanted to join a couple of these scholarly journals. It's like $500 a year. Like, my nonprofit doesn't have that kind of funding. But long story short, what I have done is anything, I'm not going to say anything, the vast majority of things that you need to be equipped to know as a family member and friend, and you don't have the time to research and blah, 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 you can go on our website under resources and it's there. COVID-19 and addiction, how to support a loved one who's suffering, all the different recovery groups that exist. What are the different medications for opioid use? What are the different medications for alcohol use? Is it genetic? Can you change, you know, all these sort of things that I wish I had at my disposal when Reed was suffering, or after Reed passed, that I just would have been like, okay, that makes sense. You know, a lot of things that people need is just the education to be able to pass on to the loved one. When someone's suffering from addiction, no one wants to be suffering from addiction. Everyone wants to get out of it. I hate when people say, oh, they can change it they want. No, they can't.
Yeah.
They literally cannot. They're trying so desperately hard. But the best thing that we can do as members of community and family members and friends of those suffering is pick up on the resources, pick up on the education that does exist. So when there is an opportunity to speak to your loved one, say, hey, listen, we see that there might be an issue. I know you're not feeling great. I know you want to change. You might be scared of going to rehab. I don't blame you. Maybe that's not the best option. Have you thought, I just saw that there's Women for Sobriety. It's a women's only group, that there's Smart Recovery, which is evidence-based practices. This person might be interested in Buddhist principles. There's Recovery Dharma, which is all about Buddhist principles and beating addiction. Like, there's so much that people can know, and just take a couple of minutes to sort of get educated, once a month, that we can pass on to people who are dealing with addiction. And these people feel less alone because they feel like, okay, I'm not boxed in. I don't have to go to a 12-step meeting. No, you can do whatever you want. There's so many different options. And I think the toughest thing is these people who are dealing in active addiction often do not have time to do the research themselves. Mm-hmm. So as family member and friends,
or the mindset.
Or the mindset, but if we can do that for them, and people can be like, oh, that's enabling. First of all, there's really no such thing as enabling, but that's a whole nother thing. What we can do is try to educate ourselves to when the timing is right and you see an opportunity, be like, hey, this exists. Another day, hey, well, also this exists. And it sets in motion what's something that someone really, really needs.
Okay, you can't just say there's no such thing as enabling and then just be like, but that's another thing. Like, no, we can't not talk about that.
We can talk about that. So up until I took craft training, I'm not like a certified practitioner. I unfortunately don't have time, and I'm not social worker or psychologist or whatever. But when I took the craft training, they said that there's no such thing as enabling. I'm like, BS, come on. Like, what do you mean? Like, there is so many examples I even know in like my head of like, people enabling family members or whatever it could be. Then they talk about it at the end of the day like this. So give you another example. I'm Mike's wife. Mike is trashed and he's going to go out to the store and go buy another 6-pack. Enabling would be, many people who think enabling would be me saying, Mike, I'm going to go out and go get that for you. Because why would you go buy? No, I care about my loved one, and I'm simply doing what anyone would in a circumstance where their loved one could get hurt and the community can get hurt. All I am doing is reducing the harm of a situation. That's simply it. So me going,
because he's going to go and get it one way or another.
He's going to go get it no matter what.
Let's be real.
Don't want anyone to die, including him or anyone else. I'm reducing
or in jail or whatever.
I'm going to go to 7-Eleven. I'm going to buy him his pack of beer, and I'm going to come back. And I'm going to leave it right there. I'm not going to give it right to him. I'll leave it right at the kitchen table. And craft clinician will probably tell you how to go. What do you say? Whatever. I don't have the information on that. But that is not enabling when you're simply trying to reduce harm. All you have to do is, and I have a whole thing in the resources, like when we say enabling, like there's a lot of things of like codependency disorder, and people talk about enabling as an actual scientific fact. According to the diagnostic DSM, whatever, which is like all the different medical terminology and psychology, there is legitimately, scientifically, clinically, no such thing as enabling or codependency. This is called interpersonal relationships with loved ones who are suffering. That's all it is. You are just trying to care for your loved one and minimize harm.
Did you just say codependency doesn't exist?
Statistically, scientifically, codependency does not. There's no such thing as codependency. There's no such thing. And I learned this through craft, but there is no such thing as codependency. For addiction, that is. There's no such thing.
Okay.
I'm telling you, it's fast. Listen, according to them, and listen, everyone's going to have different views. I'm sure there's a gazillion people who would beg to disagree. Take a look at the resource. Go look online and see if you can find, like, for addiction, the actual medical stuff and scientific data for codependency, and you'll see it doesn't exist. So look what
you did. Look what you did. Poor Kelsey right now. Poor Kelsey.
Yeah.
Mind blown.
Again, I took the training, I took the training in February. So what am I, 4 or 5 months? And up until then, I believe that codependency and enabling was like an actual thing, because people talk about it like not only through lived experience, but like I've heard doctors talk about it, like, and then the addiction medical professionals, like actual addiction doctors, not like GPs, not whatever. Every single person will tell you there's no such thing.
Well, I have to dig further into that. Do you like, and if you know a doctor or a clinician who is qualified to speak to that, I would love to bring them on the show just to talk about that. There's like Codependence Anonymous. There's like giant thing.
It's all, I'm not going to say BS because people believe in that. And I think it's important for people to believe whatever. I'll say it's not scientifically backed up. How about that?
Huh.
Yeah.
Huh.
That's why it's important, again, like to check our own, I don't know, until I took the actual training, again, by like actual professionals in the space, addiction psychologists, blah, 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 blah. I don't know. I guess I just figured like that's a thing. Like if, but it's the same thing with anything. If you have a kid who's going to do something, but you're not enabling them. You're just being a mom. You're just being a dad. It's just, it's a way that you look at things, but statistically and all that other jazz, there's nothing.
So what do you call that behavior then? The behavior that we would traditionally call codependency. What do you call it?
That's a good call. Honestly, what Dr. Myers, who's the head of Kraft, who came up with the whole thing and has done all the studies, Dr. Myers says that it's just supportive behavior. He says what there is we shouldn't be using that phrase. There's a difference between, and he won't call this enabling. He says, again, there's no such thing as enabling. There's a difference between Mike wakes up the next day and you call into work for him. He says, that's not a behavior you want to model. You don't want to call into work for him and make him excuse. He won't call that enabling. He says, but that's not a model. That's not a behavior you want to model. But you can still help your loved one, off the ground if they're like really drunk. Like that's not enabling. You just don't want them to trip over themselves.
Or get run over or whatever.
Yeah. Like whatever it is, I think, as I've been more and more in this space, I've realized how important terminology, we talked about that before, like the term addict, like all these different things, like clean, carry a connotation. And I think his point in terms of the verbiage, codependency is a different thing where apparently it doesn't exist, but in terms of the verbiage and the terminology of enabling, I think to Dr. Myers and a lot of people, it sets the wrong tone because it puts the blame on the loved one. When Jesus Christ, they already feel like they are the ones and they're the reasons why. Like it's enough of blaming people and I could have, I should have. What? No, it's turning the model of no, you're not enabling. You're just being a loved one who's actually concerned about your other loved one, and you just want them to be okay.
And here's a different way that we can
exactly. So and they give you coping, and that's a thing. You work, I believe it's 12 weeks with over 12 weeks. You do longer, you can do it shorter with a craft clinician. And, you sort of give them the backstory of your loved one and whatever. And each week you do sort of homework, you learn real life practical skills, you give them information, and you sort of work out a plan with this person, how to get you better, how to get your loved one better. Because that's all it's about, right? It's empowering the loved one to feel like they're in control of the situation. And a lot of times, as the craft clinicians have told me, the loved one who's suffering with addiction is like, Mom, like what's going on? Is everything because they notice
weird?
You're changing your behavior, and how powerful is that? Like I think anyone who's done something similar can realize the way that you change your behavior can greatly, greatly affect how someone changes their behavior. And that's kind of cool to be able to know that you can do that and have the power to.
Well, now we need to get a craft clinician on the show. So
Dr. Myers, he's awesome. The guy's brilliant. Dr. Myers, Kraft, he's the guy who created Kraft.
So how can people get involved with what you're doing? How can they help? Things like that.
Yeah. So I think honestly, the number one thing is like follow along, liking, sharing, sort of like, your podcast. It's just important that like people like share it to another friend. Like if this reaches one more person who we can help, that's how it's been from day one is, originally it was like my friends and family, and now it's people from Australia and like Thailand and places I've never been that I've always wanted to go. And so follow along, share with your community. And B, another thing is like donate $5. Like we don't take, I mean, we don't, I'll take a big check, but we take very, very, very small donations from people all over the world because we are 100% donation based. Like all the things we do besides the Walmart grant is literally from people donating $5 so I can get someone an Uber to their treatment center, donating $10 so I can pay for someone's methadone for a day and they didn't have the money to because they don't get their check in 24 hours. Like it's all of that that enables us to help the hundreds of people that we do. So, and also I'm always looking for volunteers. I love to hear people's different ideas. We can collaborate on resources, whatever it may be. And then sharing ideas. Like I'm always looking for new ways that I can help. When I got into this space, I had no idea what I was doing. And I'm always looking for new ways for people to say, oh, well, this is a really big problem in the community. Can you donate money here? Tell me, give me ideas. I'm open to it. And I want to help as many people as possible.
Awesome. Well, I think we should cap it there, my friend. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we put a lid on it?
I appreciate all the work that you're doing. I think it's really awesome to go, we were talking a little bit earlier, but I wish mainstream media covered this stuff as you did too. I think you'd be out of a job though if it did, same with
I'm mainstream media now.
Well, yeah, exactly. You're taking over. No, but it's good. It's important to have these conversations, people who care about topics like this. I think it's really nice that you sort of built a community. And it's really great the work that you're doing. So I appreciate the opportunity to come on immensely.
And likewise. And I hope to be in contact with you often now. And we'll let you go. Take care, my friend.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
There is power in numbers. If you would like to contribute to ending the stigma around emotional pain, please subscribe to our Facebook page and follow us on Instagram. Like and comment your thoughts on our posts. Find us on all audio podcast platforms. Let us come together with our lived and living experience as a resource that has the power to engage new thought processes, to promote new ideas, to broaden the spectrum of care, to show the world that the lie is dead. We can recover. There is a safer way, and we're here to show you how. If you would like to see everything we have to offer, visit www.hardknockstalks.com. Take care, everyone.